The Blast Paris Major Legend stage has now come to a conclusion, and it has been a very interesting one for multiple reasons, both good and bad. So we're here to do the recap of not just today's proceedings of the three best of threes, but also the overall Legend stage itself. We're going to start a bit differently though. We're going to go through each of the best of threes, each of the specific games, and we're going to discuss these a little bit. We'll start with Na'Vi and FaZe, as that was the first game that kicked off earlier today. Frog, we'll jump in with you first. Anything that really sticks out to you about this performance from FaZe in particular? Because Na'Vi had their issues, I think it's safe to say. I'm not sure who was the favourites coming into this game because of FaZe's up and down performances, shall we say. But were you impressed with FaZe, or was it more a case you think that Na'Vi just dropped off?
I think it was heavily Navi dropping off. FaZe looked good in some rounds, looked not so good in others. I mean, for what it's worth, I think, especially on Anubis, my butthole was clenched the entire time, right? Like, very back and forth between these two teams. And I hate to say it, but I guess this is just a far cry of what Tier 1 used to be. Right, like definitely with the showings we've seen out of Tier 2 teams this event, you can say that the levels overall gone up for a lot of these teams, but I think for FaZe and Na'Vi, like they're not in their prime. They're nowhere near their prime currently, and I think FaZe was just better today, despite Rops being very quiet, especially compared to yesterday. But overall, Na'Vi just didn't really look functional today. I hate to say it.
Yeah, there were certainly elements of that, and you just mentioned Rops. He dropped a 0.97 rating in the best of three, even though they won. So it goes to show just how off he was. Whereas Brokey went massive with 1.33 and a positive 28 kill to death ratio. Dualism, going on to the Na'Vi side of the coin, I feel a bit harsh asking this question, but has Simple had a really underwhelming major for you? Do you think he's really underperformed?
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted it just after the game that this is Simple's worst ever performance statistically at a major. It was a 1.07, which realistically is not the end of the world. This isn't a dreadful rating by any means, but when you're Simple, that is pretty poor. And it showed in the game. There was a round on Overpass where FaZe was starting to mount a little bit of a comeback, but Navi was still like 14-10 up, and they managed to take a 2v4 into a 1v1. It's Simple versus Carrigan. Simple tries to go for a shot, and it misses, happens, but he doesn't realize he has no bullets in the AWP. He goes, he plants, and as he tries to win the 1v1, he just goes to reload right in front of Carrigan's face instead. And things like that feel very uncharacteristic for Simple, considering he's such an aware player usually, and it's surprising that then nobody on his team thought to mention that he had no bullets when he wasn't then holding his pistol or anything. And I think that was kind of, even from map one, you kind of saw that Simple really isn't performing at a level that he should be.
That's kind of the vibe that I got as well. And Frog, something else that I picked up on with Simple in particular is when they were losing maps and they lost matches, it's almost like, I don't want to read too much into body language because obviously sometimes players will hide it as best as they can. They know camera's going to be in their face. They've just had a very disappointing result. But each time it panned over at Simple, it's like he just didn't care. I don't know how else to explain it. He would just walk off, like, didn't seem like he gave a shit that they just lost a map or lost a match. It just seemed like another day at the office. So I don't know if there's something deeper bubbling beneath the surface, but it feels like this Na'Vi team's in a bit of trouble.
I completely agree. I mean, listen, Simple's an amazing player, and I don't necessarily think that this is the end of Simple being, the GOAT, so to speak, right? But this whole event, I mean, the other day when we spoke about Navi and I was criticizing them, saying they weren't playing at their level, that was it, right? They're not playing as a team. There's some really questionable decision making from Simple where it just felt like he was kind of tilted. And not in the like angry shouting at his teammates like we used to see back in like the Zeus days or whatever, right? Where everyone's just quite vocal with each other. But more so just in his behavior, the way he's just kind of playing like it's a face it game. Like he'll just, oh, I'm just force buying a scout and I'm just going to go do this thing. And there's no coordination, there's no helping, like really selfish buys. And that's just so weird, right? I can't remember exactly what event it was now. Was it maybe Cologne? But whenever Nipple came into the team, so no, it must have been later than that, but still, whenever Nipple came into the team, like you could tell Simple was not happy with how they were playing initially. And it felt like, he's like 17 or something, right? It felt like Nipple was slowly kind of getting into the Navi system, but I mean, this event, he was absolutely dreadful, and I think maybe that has played into Simple's sort of behavior, just feeling like, okay, well, I'm just babysitting these academy players, and like no one is at my level, so I'm just gonna do whatever, which is just not what you want to see out of a player that's been top two for years, in the final CS:GO major.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, with it being like another year until the next major, in CS2, there's going to be a lot of time in between then and now, and I'm very curious how Na'Vi will look, where Simple may or may not be. There's a lot of question marks going forward, and a very disappointing kind of departure from the major as well. So we'll just finish on a couple points here with FaZe, and we'll move on to our next game. We do know what their first game is going to be. It's a mouth-watering prospect in terms of name value. The quarterfinals will be FaZe against Heroic. Now, Dualism, obviously, there's always a puncher's chance, right? Yes, it's best of threes, but you're on a stage. FaZe have a lot of, obviously, experience. They've won Antwerp with this exact same roster. When it comes to this match, though, have FaZe done enough to make you feasibly believe that they are going to go into that game and give Heroic a real run for their money? Because Heroic looked very, very solid. They went through 3-0.
I mean, you asked me yesterday whether I thought that FaZe were going to show up against Na'Vi, and I said you can't count them out with these players, with the level of experience they have, and with that ceiling that is incredibly high. And I kind of echo the same thing now. I think that, yeah, Heroic went 3-0. Heroic looked convincing. Heroic are, I would argue, perhaps the favourites at this point because of how Legend Stage has kind of gone. But at the same time, it's FaZe, and I think it would be unrealistic to ever say that I don't believe in them in some capacity with just how much flair that they can bring.
Yeah, I think the concerning aspect for me on that one is the fact that Rops had a bit of a quiet game today. So I'm in a kind of mode where I'm thinking, in my opinion at least, with what you just mentioned, which I definitely agree with, at the same time, I feel as if FaZe are going to need to be firing in all cylinders, because I think Heroic are going to feel this could be their major. We've seen Stown have some great performances. Cadian, of course, is always up there. They've looked so very good. Even dealing with an informed Liquid after a very disappointing Challenger stage, they beat them 2-1, quite comfortable in the end. So I'm a bit concerned for FaZe. I've got to be honest. It is possible between then and now, Heroic get in their own heads and things go horribly pear-shaped. But yeah, it's going to be a very tough game. So let's move on to our second best of three. It was Fnatic against Into the Breach. I don't think many people would have had that chalked down as a potential 2-2 matchup. But here we are. Frog, again, we'll start with you on this one. Anything that stands out to you? Because, again, I don't think many people expected it to go this way, but Into the Breach, those last two maps were pretty straightforward.
I mean, listen, I'm just really happy to see the chaos at this point. My pick'ems are ruined, and I'm just so happy to see these tier 2 teams kicking ass. I mean, for what it's worth, I guess Fnatic are, 1.5, right? They're not quite at the top, but they're certainly, more established than Into the Breach are. But yeah, I mean, definitely a bit of a strange series. Overall, I feel like Into the Breach just played super well. I don't know. It's hard to put into words, but like this is a completely new Crucial, right? Like we've seen this guy play for years on Endpoint, and right, he's the type of opper that, not to the same extent as like Draken, but like would kind of miss the easy shots sometimes. But right now that doesn't feel like it's happening so much. Yeah, you whiffed a few sitters, but he always had a teammate to bail him out, and he's hitting some absolutely insane shots, making plays that I never thought I would see Crucial do at all in my lifetime. Cypher's been absolutely monstrous. Volt has what I feel like is probably the best first bullet accuracy of this event. I don't know if that's true, but it's just every time it tabs to an enemy POV and Volt's peeking into him, it's just a one bullet headshot with the AK and he's dead. Like, it was some really just great Counter Strike, and the energy on that team. I mean, like especially on Vertigo today, like Cypher was an absolute menace. There was no shutting him down on Vertigo. He was just Cypher go kill, okay, and then he's just absolutely dominating ramp. This is just some beautiful Counter Strike, and while I'm heartbroken to see Mezzi especially fall short, so to speak. I'm also just really excited for Into the Breach and players that I've been following for quite a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I had Into the Breach. I think Dualism, you also had Into the Breach as 0-3, and you'd mentioned before, like, everyone's pick'ems are just in the bin at this stage. Like, it's just a given. But yeah, it's been great to see them really exceed the expectations, and I'm very glad and happy to be proven wrong on that. Do you have any general thoughts on this game, Dualism? Because I thought Fnatic probably came in as the favourites, but they only won 12 rounds on Overpass and Vertigo collectively, which was a bit surprising for me.
Yeah, but I think it was one of those things where they were just outclassed by Into the Breach. I think that Into the Breach looked like they knew what to expect every single time, and I think that paired with players that are actually showing up and are actually in form is always going to win out. And it's an interesting point that there's a lot of former endpoint players that have done very well this major, and Cypher is probably the one big British guy that's not been on endpoint, which is quite funny because he's then really shown that he probably should have been over the years. And there's this is a little bit of a tangent, but stick with me with it. There are a handful of players that were at the first CS:GO major back in 2013 who were participating in this major in some capacity. And Crims was on LGB Esports back then, but he is the only player that is still active from the very, very short list of players that were active back then that didn't make it through. Carrigan made it through, Dupree made it through, Apex made it through, Cadian made it through. The only other person that was a player then that didn't make it was Devilwalk, but obviously he was then coaching Bad News Eagles, and Pimp, who's then obviously doing the desk work for this major.
Speaking of Crims, then, we can maybe elaborate on this a little bit more, because as you just highlighted there perfectly, he has been around the block for a very, very long time. And looking at his stats, he didn't have a great series here. It was a 0.9 rating. Is there still gas in the tank, do you think, Frog? Is there still a future for Crims at the top level of CS? And if so, is it time for him to move on to another team, or some changes perhaps, or is it too early to say?
I mean, listen, watching Inferno, I'd say absolutely Crims is still a player that can hang around with the best of them. Just because, like, he was an absolute monster. That Inferno from Fnatic was really difficult to deal with, especially on that CT side. It's the kind of CS where, like, Fasher's just basically sitting AFK in pit with his utility, just waiting for an execute to come in. He drops the smoke at his feet, he drops the Molotov in front of you, and it's just really difficult to deal with that player. And then Crims from the A site around that cold Zera box, just doing damage round after round after round. He was going in and making big plays early round as well, like pushing through the G2 top mid smoke. Just a huge amount of impact, and you really can't understate that. And even rounds where there's a round where Fnatic lost to full Glocks. They got popped on the B site. Nikodos gets taken down by some Glocks, and Into the Breach were able to convert that. And Crims, you can see him, he's just like, don't mind, like, he's just keeping everybody cool, calm, and collected. So, for what it's worth, I still think Crims has the mechanical skill and the right attitude to perform with top level players. But I guess, is it a case of, will Fnatic want to keep him? I don't know. That's left to be seen. I don't necessarily think that he has to, like, take a step down and go to a team like Eyeballers, like Flusha and JW have, where he has to, like, go and play domestically in Sweden, though that could be a good option for him. But I guess it's also hard to see him on a top level team, like, a FaZe Clan or something like that, right?
Yeah, it feels like he is certainly a step above Flusher and JW, meaning no disrespect at all. But I suppose if there was an opportunity there, I'd be curious to see if he would delve into like a lower tier of CS, kind of like what Taz did, and try and build up that next generation of Swedish players. Because for the longest time, it was a gate kept kind of side of the region, and maybe one why Nip and Fnatic for a while did drop off in terms of their fully Swedish rosters. So we'll go into our third best of three, which of course is Apex and NIP. At this time, we'll start with you, Dualism. Anything that stands out to you about this game?
I suppose, yeah. I mean, I had faith in Apex in the challenger stage. I had them as my 3-0. So I'm not super surprised to see them beat NIP there. And I think was it yesterday? I'm losing track. So much CS. But NIP has a big moment of tilt on Ancient against ENCE. And so for everything to kind of fall apart and crumble yet again on Ancient, and from the outside looks like a similar vibe where they are just kind of getting in their own heads, kind of tilting and not really being supportive to one another. Yeah, this is a result that does not surprise me looking at it kind of in retrospect.
I think the surprising aspect to me is it went 2-0 when you consider that on Ancient there was a vast lead on the side of NIP. I think it was like 13-3 or 14-3 or something like that, and they ended up losing from that position. And like the interview afterwards with Alexi, like he was absolutely gobsmacked. Like he was shell shocked. He didn't know what the hell to say. Like he was just completely and utterly devoid of almost any emotion or any rational thought. You know, it just, what the hell just happened type mentality. But I'm not going to talk any longer because I know Frog has a rant up his sleeve, okay? So Frog, feel free to just unleash, bro.
Woo! Okay, so I mean, for me, the best word I could use to describe Apex in this series was resilient, right? On Vertigo, they were 6-9 at the half on their CT side of Vertigo, which, you know, it's one of those maps that can be pretty. It's not super one-sided, but you still feel like, okay, that's not a great start. And they managed to bring that back into OT and win it 19-17, right? That's pretty big. And to then be, yeah, I think it was 3-14, right? That's so few rounds. And like, oh man, Ancient was just absolutely insane. We hear NIP screaming constantly, shrieking like banshees practically. Like Hedrick by all means was playing really really well, but like constantly screaming. Alexi B going, I'm rent free in your head and shit like that. Just constant trash talking. Config as well. And you could see it. The halftime is obviously just a really like difficult position to be in, but Apex were not letting that get to them at all. And it was just beautiful to watch that kind of Counter-Strike, right? You could see Nock was just in the zone. Like, he was just opping, hitting shot after shot after shot. And he was, like, same for Jacob, right? Dualism highlighted him yesterday as one of the most consistent players throughout the Legend stage. And, I mean, that was true again today. Just constant, impactful multi-kills. Kixan as well, definitely somebody that deserves a lot of praise because not a lot of people know about him. But for what it's worth, and I'm gonna do a little side piece here, where Kixan was on Blue Jays previously, right? A full North Macedonian team, and the only player that's really gotten a lot of hype from that roster is Kakanito, just because he was posting like 1.2, 1.3 ratings on the regular. But Kixan was a big reason for that as the IGL for that team and as sort of the second star ahead maybe even of their Opera 8 kit. And he's basically built up that North Macedonian team, that scene from nothing in the same way that Bad News Eagles have, right? So it's just really amazing to see him super cool in the clutches. Same for Stiko, like constantly clutch after clutch on Ancient. Just beautiful CS. And considering JL was having a pretty quiet series, all things considered, by his standards, since he's kind of one of their star players, it was really sick to see him just screaming and hyping up his teammates who were just winning insane clutches. while Nip just looked completely destroyed, right? Once they started losing rounds, there was no one doing that, kind of as Dualism highlighted, right? That tilt that we saw against Ents yesterday on Ancient, it was the same thing. No one's really hyping each other up. Um, yeah, I'm just really happy for Apex. They were clearly the better team. They had a much better T side than Nip did at all. It was just they weren't able to get it over the line. It would fall short in the clutches, and I'm just really, really happy. Obviously, a little sad for Headtrick considering he played really, really well today. But I kind of also want to touch on that. I think what Headtrick did today was amazing on the rifle. I'm still iffy about his opping. Like, don't get me wrong, he's an incredible opper, but he is still just a hybrid player. He's not a dedicated opper. And I still kind of just feel like Nipper just looking to get a Monesy, and that's not really what they got. They got Headtrick, which is an amazing player, but don't force him to be something he's not.
I believe Dualism wanted in after this point. So, Dualism?
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of highlight as well that Apex's coach is Cuban, and this is a guy that was with VP for about 4 years when they were from about 2015 to 2019, and after that, when he was then kind of inactive, he kind of bounced between two projects that like he was with Envy. I hate that they're called Team Envy, but whatever, and then with Mad Lions for a year, and I think that people kind of perhaps were not respecting his pedigree as a coach, and that realistically, DJL's not bad, definitely not, but I think that there is definitely an experience gap in terms of the coaching there that probably does help Apex bring out a new level to their game as well.
Definitely, and coaching often, I'm sure Frog is going to agree with this point, is often overlooked. I think a lot of people will focus on the performances individually, and they'll be like, "Oh, this player fragged hard, and this player didn't," and X, Y, and Z. But there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. There's so many people that are involved, from analysts through the coaching staff, through the management, and everything in between. So there's a lot of moving parts in these teams, and so really, the 8 teams that have made it through to the champion stage did nail it. They got it done. Yes, we've had some massive surprises. Into the Breach, Gamer Legion, I think, are going to be 2. Apex, probably less so. Monty, probably less so. But considering that these are the last 8 teams at the major, quite remarkable, quite incredible. Now, just before we move on to our rapid fire positives and negatives, Frog, do you think this is an indication of a positive or negative overall in the Counter-Strike landscape? And what I mean by that, having this many teams that weren't expected to make it this far in the major, is that good for the current state of the game, or is it a bit of a tell as to some of the dodgy tier 1 kind of skill level that we have right now in CS?
I mean, that's a really hard question to answer. If I'm honest with you, I guess it is kind of a negative thing, just because it's hard to build fans when you don't really have top tier teams performing. If this was just a case of tier 2 teams have really caught up and they're just playing amazing Counter Strike and everyone's kind of in their prime, I'd say this is amazing, right? Having so many really competitive teams is overall always a positive thing. But I think it's kind of just a negative given that a lot of these tier 1 teams are just not where they used to be. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly why that is, right? Why so many teams are struggling or making mistakes that you look back a few years ago and feel kind of basic or be like below a team of that level, right? Maybe it's the fact that a lot of these teams have had to make significant changes with bringing up new players and stuff in an online era. I don't know. I in a way, I'm just speaking out loud here or thinking out loud. Or sorry, I don't think that's necessarily the case because we've seen these players have incredible rises with people like Brokey, for example, who was still relatively low level just a few years back. It's hard to say. I think this is still a pretty exciting major, but I guess ultimately, and it's not to take anything away from these teams, but if Monty or Gamer Legion or Enter the Breach or Apex win the major, I guess it leaves a kind of weird asterisk in how you close out CS:GO, right? People are not necessarily going to think it's a fluke major, but I mean, outsiders and then this, and it'll kind of just feel potentially like a Gambit era because I might be completely wrong here, but it would really surprise me if Apex then established themselves as the number one team undoubtedly, and then suddenly start playing the most consistent brand of Counter-Strike. I don't think they're there yet, and so it would be a little disappointing to see these teams potentially win the major and close out CS:GO this way.
Yeah, the reason I posed that question to you, because it is a bit of a tough one, and I think it's a very divisive question. Some people are going to go hard on one side and others on the other. For me, starting off this sort of like rapid fire positives and negatives of the overall recap of this stage, you could probably add the challenges. One of the negatives for me has been the overall level of Counter-Strike that I've watched. I've watched a lot of maps, I've watched a lot of CS over the duration of this tournament, and I haven't been massively impressed. Maybe with Heroic and Vitality in particular are the two teams where I'm like, okay, this is looking pretty sharp, it's looking pretty stable. There's been a lot of iffy moments, there's been a lot of questionable decisions. I suppose you could factor in pressure, last major, a lot of caveats. I'm also a little bit stale on some of the maps in the current pool, and it's actually a very big surprise to me that I'm saying that Inferno might be my least interesting map to watch now, when it's been a classic for so many years. It's just turned into this weird, like, fiasco of saves. It's just not fun to watch, and I'm starting to feel the same way about a few of the other maps. Like, overall, I think Blast has actually done an excellent job with this major. Production issues have been pretty much minimal, if any. A lot of the things have been good. The CS, though, for me personally, I haven't been that entertained. Like, Dualism, what are your thoughts on that? Do you agree with me or disagree?
I mean, I can't take you seriously because you enjoy Vertigo, unironically, as a player. So, I'm gonna just ignore that point. But I, the, I think that this is perhaps a hot take, but I think that when it comes to professional Counter-Strike in general, I don't think the maps matter all that much until in the sense of that realistically, I want to see the maps that produce the best CS, whether that's close games or enabling interesting individual performances, etc. And I think that the issue with the maps is that whatever you add, if you add something too soon, it will get banned a lot. We just won't see it when you change one map at a time, because teams will just either their permaban gets removed and they'll just ban the new map, or it becomes a map that you take a very long time to see develop into its full potential. Or you don't change the maps and then things will get stale, or there'll be maps that teams tend to avoid anyway. And if you have a lot of tournaments with BO3s, there will be teams that ban certain maps that we will then just very, very rarely see anyway. Like I've had I couldn't even begin to guess what the least played map is at this major, but I, yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I feel like the map point is that ideally when we go into CS2 we just have a big overhaul, but I think that the issue with that is that the quality of CS will definitely drop off as teams have to relearn things quite quickly, even if there is a gap of half a year between these majors. In fact, it's not even half a year, right? Because it's, I think, March. So I don't think there's really enough time for then, if there were to be like a new map pool and all these new mechanics, for the top level to instantly emerge from it.
I wonder if now is maybe one of the best times, though, with CS2 around the corner, with the hype, with a lack of major for quite a considerable amount of time as well. I suppose that's a question for another day. But Frog, as you are involved very much, intimately with the maps and learning all of the little bits and pieces and really mastering the game as a coach yourself, like what's your take on this point? Are you still enamored with the maps? Are you enjoying the current CS, or is it a bit of a problem for you as well?
Well, I used to love Inferno, and we've played it so much in officials over in Bravado lately that I'm sick of it, brother. I can't even lie. Like, I am absolutely sick of playing Inferno. And while it's fun to play something like Anubis, so few teams are interested in learning the map, at least domestically in South Africa. I know it's better in Europe, but I mean, for what it's worth, it was only played 5 times in the Legends stage, and 7 in the Challenger stage. It's been a lot of Mirage and Inferno still, and while we've seen like Overpass make a bit of a comeback, Ancients had a quite a bit of play as well. It's just it is getting a little stale. We're certainly seeing new tiny meta things change, like, oh, how are teams going to approach, I don't know, Cave on Ancient or something like that. But for the most part, you have different approaches to Banana, and stylistically, based on how the enemy team is approaching it, well, you adjust what version you want to play, and that's kind of it. Like, the meta's gotten a little stale in that sense. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, right? But like, I don't think just adding a bunch of new maps would necessarily work. It'd be kind of interesting just because that's not happened before. So if there were suddenly 3 new maps, well, you can't ban them all. But it's hard to say. I'm a little bored with how things are, but there's always new things that you can learn on every map that can actually change your perspective. And for me, one of the biggest ways to change your perspective is by watching lower level CS, and maybe it's not a coincidence that we're seeing teams like Apex and Into the Breach and Monty doing so well.
That's true, like a fresh look, and I think it was someone from Into the Breach. I can't quite remember which player it was. They said that it's easier for them to play against tier 1 opposition as opposed to tier 2 because it's so regimented. And against tier 2, tier 3, it's a lot more, lackadaisical, throw it at the wall and see what sticks. And it catches a lot of people off guard. So I think Into the Breach themselves have kind of personified that with certain smoke pushes. I think this is something that you actually discussed yesterday or the day before, Frog, when it comes to them and some of their strengths and weaknesses. And I think we really have seen that manifest. So what I'll do is we'll do a rapid fire, because obviously this video has been going on for a while now. Well, I'll give you a chance to go through a positive or 2 positives and 2 negatives and just a brief summary overall of the Legends stage. So we'll start with you, Dualism. Can you give us your 2 positives?
Okay. I would say that I'd say for me the first one definitely has to be Vitality. I think it's really important that a French team did make it at least as far as playoffs. Hopefully they do go further, but Into the Breach definitely on a tear with it. But it's also something I would like to see in some form or another if Valve were to actually descend from the heavens and bless us with a better major qualification system that basically allows for there to be not quite a fast track, but something that helps provide for a team that is the local heroes to actually make it to majors. Because I think it would be ridiculous if, say, in Copenhagen, you didn't have any Danish teams for that crowd, for example. But yeah, I think that simply for hometown pride, I think it's great that Vitality are there, especially as they are based out of Paris. It isn't even just like a national thing. It is very, very local, and Vitality do have a great sort of dedicated fan base of ultras. Golden Hornets were very loud in Antwerp as well, even when Vitality weren't there.
That's the truth. They were incredibly loud. They're actually quite amazing. So I'm certainly interested to hear what they're going to be like when Vitality get to the stage and actually play in front of them. So Vitality, one of your positives. What would the second be?
I feel like there's nothing I could, for me at least, like just like looking at the teams, looking at the results. I feel like there's nothing that I'm looking at that stands out as something that we've not already discussed. I guess maybe Gamer Legion, because I feel like they qualified, and I don't think we even really mentioned that they qualified. But they did very, very well, and not a single person that I was tracking, at least in my pick'ems or that I saw, had any faith in them. But they absolutely smashed it. But they have a bit of a rough one against Monty as their opener.
Yeah, just to also chime in on that, I had such little faith in Gamer Legion, and I'll hold my hands up and say this, that at one point I nearly put them as my 0-3 team because they were playing Na'Vi first and because I was a little bit unsure of their Challenger stage trajectory. So the fact that they've came through 3-1 plus 19 round difference as well, very, very impressive indeed. And certainly worthy of that 5th spot. Frog, for you, I'm going to assume one of these positives might be Monty, maybe.
That's not a bad way of looking at it, but no, actually, I think my first positive will actually be heroic. Just because, I've touched on the descending quality of Tier 1 Counter-Strike. I don't think that's fully applicable to heroic. I think heroic, in my mind, currently are the closest team to what we had in the Prime Astralis days, in the sense that, like, this isn't just a team of 5 incredible players, the same way you could kind of look at FaZe Clan, right, where it's just really 5 stars or whatever. And that's, I mean, sure, there's been Kerrigan, but like, you've always looked at that roster as like a star-studded lineup. Heroic, yeah, they have really good players. I don't think anybody's disrespecting that, but I don't think people put enough respect on Shush or Tesses or Yabi, right? A lot of people will hype up Stown, people like Cadian because he's very loud and he's very honest, but Heroic have such amazing team play. They don't rely purely on individuals. It's very much a system kind of team. There's a lot of helping each other out, so to speak. That this is the closest thing to what Astralis used to have as a system, and so for that, they're the kind of team that I'm really excited to see. Obviously, I'm a huge FaZe fan. I've never hidden that bias. I absolutely love Kerrigan and Rops. They're my 2 favorite players, but um so I wouldn't be upset if FaZe win. I'll put it that way. But at the same time, if Heroic were to win this major, I think it would probably be very well deserved because they're playing probably the best CS out of any team right now. And as such, I think it'd be amazing to see what they can do with a bit more longevity and maybe going into CS2 with some potential meta changes.
Yeah, there's certainly a part of me that hopes that Cadian does get his hands on the major. It would certainly be sucky for Nico and some other players that haven't managed to get their hands on a CS:GO major. But at the end of the day, Cadian has been around, as Dualism highlighted, for a very, very long time. I remember when he played in NA for a while. Like, he's been back and forth. He's had a lot of ups and downs, and it would just be a great storyline and narrative if he was able to make it through. What would your second positive be behind Heroic?
Well, I guess it's a bit more generic, but I think it's seeing, at least with, say, Monty or Apex today, that teams are not purely reliant on one individual star anymore, right? And this has kind of been the narrative we've been drawing, especially Dualism, throughout the last few days. But Apex today, right? JL had a really quiet series, yet Apex managed to win. Individuals showing up when they're meant to. And I think that's the essence of Counter-Strike. It's not about having a Simple. It's not about having a Zywoo. It's more about having players that could step up on any given moment and play the game really well. And that's one of FaZe's great strengths, right? Even earlier today, Kerrigan having some really, really crucial rounds where he just goes out and makes a play. And that's not a player you necessarily would expect that from. He's not an aim star, but you know what? He's in the moment. He knows his role at that exact moment in the round, and he goes out and does it. And I think we're seeing that teams like Monty, teams like Gamer Legion, teams like Apex and Into the Breach, they're capable of doing that. Everyone is capable of stepping up, and I think that's just a positive thing overall for Team CS as a whole, is seeing that tier 2 teams aren't taking this flawed approach of, well, we just have this one really crazy guy who just drops 30 kills every map and we get carried to a win, right? And we just sit back and set up some flashes for him. No, it's very much Team CS. And so that, I think, will make at least the champion stage quite entertaining.
I certainly hope so, because I think maybe it's gone a little bit flat in some people's regards, and that's actually going to be one of my negatives. And seeing as it kind of goes on from what you were saying there, for me, the fact that we don't have Na'Vi, we don't have Ents, we don't have G2, Fury is not taking part. Obviously, Cloud9 didn't even make it here, Outsiders, etc. For me, the fact that we do have some of these less-known teams might hurt the viewership, and it may very well hurt the hype of the actual champion stage itself. And I know there's nothing that Blast or any of the teams can do about that, but at the same time, the fact that we don't have some of the best players on the planet, some of the rockstar kind of players at the champion stage, I think is a bit of a mark against this major. And considering that Heroic and FaZe are playing each other quite literally in the very first match of the champion stage in the quarterfinals, also means we are going to lose another juggernaut team. Now, I would expect Heroic will probably win that game, but as we've already touched on, you never quite know with FaZe. So for me, that's one of my negatives, and I'll just go with a quick positive as well. For me, it's Liquid. because listen, I don't think I'm alone in not believing in these guys at all when it came to the Legends stage. They sucked, to be brutally honest, in the Challenger stage. They were one map away from elimination against Fluxo out of all teams. They come into this stage, I had zero faith, and yet they managed to go 3-1, and the only team they lost against is the team we were just talking about. It was Heroic, and they even took a map off Heroic. So very impressive stuff. So just quickly, Dualism, what would be a negative for you overall on this Legend stage?
I think for me, it's the lack of real storyline building that has existed with these new teams. Because yes, that a lot of these players or a lot of these teams are not necessarily as storied as a FaZe and Navi, a Fnatic, and NIP, but there are stories within these teams. There are players on those teams that have stories, and I feel like I know it's been years and I know I should get over it, but like we don't have player profiles anymore. We don't have any of that extra content that builds up these players in any capacity, and I think it's a shame considering Blast are so good at that type of thing. It's a shame that there hasn't been more. Like, I think you easily could have had spotlights on every single team, but we've just not really got anything with any depth or any capacity. And I'm looking at Blast's YouTube channel. They have the overtimes that for the shows that they've done for the last few days of Legends, and they've got the Launders show. Cool. Like that I feel like that's a missed trick when actually, yeah, it lower tier teams, quote quote, making it through over the favorites could be bad, but I think it would be really easy to turn that into a positive and say, okay, yeah, these are guys you've never heard of. Well, now you're going to learn about them, and this is why you want to be supporting Gamer Legion, or why you want to support Apex, or why you want to support any of or Monty. You know, I think that there was an opportunity that feels quite missed here, and it's a bit of a shame.
I actually completely agree with you, and I think it goes perfectly with my negative as well. Yeah, I think when you combine the two, it just feels like it's a bit lacking, you know, and it's no one's fault in particular. Yes, you could maybe point the finger at the content production and things of that nature, but sometimes that's just Counter-Strike for you, you know. I mean, remember Krakow? Like that was pretty wacky as well. Frog, what is your overall negative of the Legends stage?
I guess my overall negative, and it kind of goes a bit against what you were saying, but like I'm just really disappointed in tier 1 teams, I guess. And we touched on, or I touched on, teams playing like really sound Counter Strike at the moment, and tier 1 teams kind of struggling to close out rounds or series, right? Making basic mistakes that we didn't necessarily used to see. And while it sucks to not have a name like Navi here, and you could argue, you know, the seeding just because FaZe Clan, you know, kind of really struggling to even qualify for this major to begin with is sort of now why we're seeing them matched up against Heroic in the quarterfinals. But at the end of the day, the only people you can blame are well, not the players or the teams, right? I'm not trying to direct hate, but in a way it is, right? Like if you're not playing good Counter Strike, well, then sorry. Even if you're simple, even if you're Nico, you lose. You know, these guys showed up in the server and outclassed you, and that's only on you. You know, if you're not able to show that you're the dominant team, sorry, but bye bye. And I'm gonna go watch some Apex Liquid, right? Like, and so I think that's just my negative. Is just that we're not seeing the best Counter Strike that we've seen before, and obviously the overall level is still much better. So even if you took Prime SK or whatever and matched them against this version of FaZe would probably win. But it's still like relative. We're just not seeing the same kind of dominance that we used to see out of tier 1 teams, and I don't think that's a bad thing, but I just find it disappointing, and I don't think the critique should be towards these, you know, lower tier teams like Apex and Into the Breach for making it to this stage. It really is on the tier 1 teams for not being at that level that everyone kind of thinks they're at. So that's kind of my negative, I suppose.
Yeah, I think we did touch on that as well before, that it feels like the overall level of Counter-Strike hasn't quite been at the level that maybe we're hoping for, other than maybe Heroic and perhaps Vitality as well. So one final question for both of you, and in one word, we don't normally do predictions, but as it is the champion stage, in one word, which team do you think is going to win the major at this point? Jules, and we'll start with you.
Vitality.
Okay, Frog?
I'll go with Heroic.
I'm also going to go with Vitality. I'm going to fully believe in the French, which always goes wrong for me, but I'm going to say that Zaiwu on French soil in front of a French crowd is going to go massive. So thank you very much for both of your time. It's been a bit of a longer video, but obviously we've been recapping the entire stage. We'll be getting back underway once the champion stage does start. We've got some cracking quarterfinals, and we will catch you next time, guys. Peace for now.